This is a slightly different take on the podcast. Today I've got with me Christine and Jody from Cheshire West Recycling. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. This is a slightly different format. We're just doing a shorter piece. Cheshire West Recycling won the LARAC Best New Idea Award earlier this year, and that was for a project where you stopped using agency staff. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, do you want me to
please.
start? I'll start, okay. We're a council-owned company, Cheshire West Recycling. So it goes back to the fact that when we started and we took over the service from Kia, who was a previous contractor, we had about a third of the workforce that were agency, which was obviously a really high number. The principles that we're set up on is about being a little bit different, and it's a council-owned company that's set with sort of social values and much driven by cooperative principles. And that's what our ethos is, and that's what we're here to do. So obviously that didn't fit with that view. And one of the things we wanted to look at from the start is how we provide a more stable workforce that we can invest in and develop. And obviously that is very difficult when you've got a very heavy sort of agency focus in there. So one of the things we looked at is how we can reduce that from an early point, and the view being that actually we want to try and get down to zero agency. And the view being, I think, and I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that it just hasn't really been done in an organisation sort of our size running waste services. So we service 162,000 households. We have a twin bin system. We run fleet services. We're quite a big organisation. We've got 300 and plus staff. So actually we're relatively large. So it was something that was a bit of a challenge for us to do, and we bit the bullet and actually went for it in terms of this year. And we set the rule that we were going to go for zero agency. But in doing that, we obviously had to change quite a lot of how we operate because the whole organisation was set up on this idea.
So was that cold turkey then? Did you go from like your normal third of the staff being an agency to zero, or did you phase this in gently?
No, that's been done over since we were set up in 2020. So that's what we inherited, and it has reduced over time.
Yeah.
But not in a steady downward trend. You know, that's gone up and down as we've had different challenges. As we were set up, we sort of started in the first lockdown, so we immediately went into COVID, which actually helped in sort of terms of the workforce because you couldn't have as many staff in there as well. Then we had the national driver shortage, so obviously that needed to be supplemented where we could with temporary labour as well. And then we did a major service change in 2022. And the introduction of chargeable garden waste as well, which then made that a seasonal service. So there was a lot to these points where we've had to turn agency up and down, but sort of as we've reached a bit of a sort of plateau and sort of steady services that we're delivering, we've been able to sort of really focus on that then, because there was no significant periods of change following that.
And one of the big things, the whole social, is that social value. So what we'd started to do, we'd focus quite heavily on service from Kia, lift it, shift it, don't break it, initially, that right into lockdown. So the day we started was literally days after we went into national lockdown. We started operating as an organisation. So we focused in the first 12 months on that and delivering then some of those social principles. But as we've moved further forward, it's saying actually, no, we need to actually deal with this last major problem here, which is particularly the seasonal working. It was always accepted that you couldn't survive without seasonal temporary workers because you've got to turn them on off for the garden waste rounds. And we're like, well, I think we can do, but we need to do that a little bit differently. And that's why we went for the idea of actually, let's set ourselves a target and we'll go for that. And we've been working on that over the last sort of, like I said, over the last 12 months particularly. And obviously when we won the LARAC Award, which was really good recognition, there's so many people came over and said, come and talk to us about that. How have you done that? That's impossible. And that's really where this has sort of come from, the idea that actually it is possible, but you do have to rethink how you do things. We're very data driven in how we do things. And you need that as well, because otherwise the reason you need agency, like things just pop up out of nowhere. It's, I need it for this, or I don't know about that, or this guy. This stuff is all predictable if it's managed very carefully with lots more controls on it. So a lot of the time they'll get agency in because you need them on a Friday, so you'll get them in on a Monday, but then you've got them the whole week, so I don't want to lose them in the week. And how do you manage leave and holiday and absence? So we are much tighter on how we manage that and are very data driven, and we had to build quite a lot of data and dashboards to allow the supervisors and the planning team to do that. And we've set up the whole organisation around sort of a plan, deliver, review approach, which is based on constant reviewing of the data, which allows us to optimise rounds. But also, once you've got complete control of the service and you know where all the moving pieces are at any one time, you can alter one of them pieces, which was obviously the agency for us.
So what are the key things that drive, on a day-to-day basis, how many staff you need? Obviously, the garden waste is, seasonal. Apart from that, your dry recyclables, your refuse, what causes your variation in the number of crews that you need day to day?
So, as part of the service change that we did in 2022, we did a big route optimization exercise. A lot of those routes had sort of been running for the last decade and had slowly become less and less efficient. So we've done that route optimization, but then with a view that we would never need to do that again. So we haven't just run those rounds and then just sort of, that they're not set in stone. We very much manage the work on a daily and weekly basis. And as Jody was saying about our plan, deliver, review approach, we have a planning team, a very small planning team, but that is there to make sure that we're not sort of getting this drift and becoming inefficient. So that has been a bit of a challenge in terms of the different way that we work, and the crews are not always on that same round every single week with the same households. We're constantly monitoring the operation and monitoring the start and finish times, seeing where we've got gaps and where we can supplement them. So we've got into the habit of moving work around sort of during the day, and then changing things on a more permanent basis if we're seeing a pattern in where we're having to move work. So we have obviously the rounds run all week, and then we have weekly review meetings where the planning team and the operational team will sit together. They'll look at what went well, what went wrong, and then have a discussion about whether those things happen every time we're doing those rounds, and it was or if it was an anomaly that week. So then we'll look at permanently moving. So in that way, we've managed to sort of make the work a bit more balanced and steady, so we can then be more predictable in terms of what staffing levels we're going to need, because we've got a better idea about how we can manage that. And then that obviously then feeds into our holiday allowances and other absence allowances and stuff that we're monitoring for.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I see when you make routes more efficient. You're actually taking out quite a lot of contingency that's built into them, but that inefficiency gives you some slack to actually do a bit more if something goes wrong, and when you take that out, it perhaps makes it even more dynamic and more difficult to cope with when things go awry.
Yeah,
and it does, and you have to. If you're not careful, and one of the reasons we have a separation of duty between planning and delivery, and it comes back for the idea that it's marking your own homework sort of approach. Whereas when you started, we had very much a silo-based approach. You'd have things in streams. So you'd have a garden waste supervisor who'd sort stuff out, and then you'd have it for domestic, and you'd have it that way. And actually, the view was that that's not how you would work if you were sort of a logistics company or something. You would work on the idea of having a sort of task-based driven approach. So what we'll have is the idea that actually people were working in silos. So the garden waste supervisor would worry about himself, and you wouldn't have the proper efficiencies. Whereas actually what we do is by separating it, saying, look, the planning team's function, the homework task is empty all these bins within these hours, get back at this time, do it safely, don't miss them, complete. That's the homework task set. So it's very much picked up from, like you would have if you've used Gusto or HelloFresh or something like that, the concept of putting the right tasks in the right hands. So actually you wouldn't have your chef who was also doing your booking system and doing other bits and pieces, you'd let him cook. So actually the view being here, we take that approach. So actually the planners use the data well, because the supervisors are good, but they're not great. They don't want to be sat behind dashboards. That's not their skill set. You've got people who are very data-driven who will do that, and the routes are planned out, and then that's passed over alongside sort of like instruction on how to deliver the service efficiently. And then the operations team basically go on way and cook it, essentially. Follow the instructions, cook the food, and then everyone sits down at the end of the day and go once a week and goes, right, let's look at all the data performance. And quite a lot of the time, planning will say, well, I need more resource, or I was a bit short here, and then. But rather than base it on it touch and feel, it's like, well, let's have a look at the data. So you'll go, well, actually, okay, you are right, but you actually had some resource here, so you could have moved it in the day. Mm-hmm. We also have a hub controller role, whose job is really pivotal to make sure that once the rounds are planned, supervisors put the guys out in the morning, the hub controller comes in at 9 o'clock, and their job is to keep moving the pieces to get everything level, finished, and done at the same time, because that's the approach.
So that, and obviously our workforce traditionally is on a task and finish. So that has been one of the things that's sort of driven some of the inefficiency with having one supervisor for one waste stream. They will concentrate on getting their stream complete before they would contemplate helping one of the other streams. And that's, so you can do really well on one service and everything's falling apart on another. And that's really been the benefit of having the hub controller, hasn't it? So yes, we still technically have task and finish, but what we've tried to do is change what the task is. So the task is to empty every bin on every stream across the borough, and that means that we sort of have to keep that resource moving throughout the day, and that can be a sort of challenge in changing that mindset and the way that we sort of move work during the day. It's a bit of a battle sometimes, although we've made quite a lot of progress in that the crews now expect that they will sort of have more work at the end of the day, possibly when they finish their initial work pack. But then there's also that expectation that if they're struggling with theirs and they've encountered some problems during the day, that they will be sort of helped out by other crews and so on. So, and it's being able to sort of identify what resource you have, and even though you're not going to be able to swap one vehicle for another, you can move people and such during the day so that you can sort of help out in the areas that need it and so on. So, and that has been a change. We've worked the way that they have done for years and years with the supervisor team doing the one stream. So now we sort of do it on a task structure rather than a stream structure, because they were all doing all of the same tasks all day, but just focusing on one area. So we have a set of tasks that the supervisors complete when they come in the morning across the whole service, and then a set of tasks that the afternoon supervisors do. And then you've got another set of tasks that sort of, then they can focus on the admin side of that, which was often the sort of things that were dropped when you're dealing with sort of crisis management of what's going on in the operation during the day. So things like ensuring that all of the remote audits and the on-street audits and stuff are done. Any of the HR stuff that sits in the background, that there's someone who can focus on that without having to deal with what's happening on the ground all the time. So.
I think one of the things we did notice is when you move away from a supervisor seeing the same person every day, you depersonalise that slightly, which then causes a problem actually, because you knew whether you'd spoke to Dave about what Dave had done wrong because you saw him the day before. Well, the supervisors rotate, so actually it may well be that you don't. So, but the problem being, you need to remove that guessing approach to say actually just put it in a system. So one thing we've had to be much clearer around, and it helps because of how we run it based purely on sort of data and information, is actually you go through the HR process, and actually we know wherever you are, and the rules are very clear in terms of the thresholds for what acceptable miscollection performance is, and then they'll go through the HR process and the performance process based on if they haven't met that. And before I come to speak to you, Tim, if I knew I had to speak to you about something, I would look in the system, I would know where you're up to, what the process. So then you're then picking up a case file almost and taking it on to the next step, because otherwise you'd end up with a situation where you'd have people. You tend to find 90% of your problems come from a small number. And I think one of the things we have done very well by going to a database approach is actually we're looking at everything into one SQL database, and then from there we look at how we can look at full patterns and trends across the service. So one of the things we're quite keen on at the moment is looking at any rounds that have got under time, actually what's their performance like. So actually if they're dashing around getting speed and offences and missing stuff, it's a much easier conversation when you do some coaching with them to say, right, okay, great, you finished 40 minutes early, but actually there was all these failures. Now you might have some other people who went into overtime and performed badly. Now that's probably because we've not planned that properly. If we've given them too much work and they're having to rush around, that's our fault. And this process allows us to go through that. And I think what we do is we plug lots of things in, and we use the collective as one of the base. So the collective is a base product for us, and it's pushed straight into the SQL database. And that tells us who's on what crew, who's on what round. It fills all that element. But because I've got that information, I can then plug in the speeding offences, or I can plug in the infringements. I can plug in, because it all sits on a base of going down to an individual person and a crew. So you can coach a crew or you can coach individuals. So speeding offences last week, and I'm talking any speeding offences over anyway, even gateway. We had none, and we run in 100 trucks going huge distances. I mean, when we started, the numbers were really high, but that's because it's just coaching.
At around 120 speeding offences a week.
And they are, sorry, they're not like getting speeding
tickets.
Fines. You are talking 10% over, and a lot of it's gateway. 50 hit 30, but there should be at 30 at the gateway. So actually, and that's been down to coaching. So we can look at the person, the infringements, and you speak to the top 5, then in the next 5, then the next 5, and eventually you get through everyone. And so it's that slow stepped approach that we've taken to coaching.
But it's a very matter of fact conversation, isn't it? Because this is what happened. It's not, I think you've been speeding. It's not. It's not conversational. It's very focused on facts, and it's something you can then work to improve and see a measured improvement. Quite a different way for drivers in particular to work. Have they bought into it? Do they like it?
I mean, I think it's, as you say, when you've got sort of that evidence to support the conversations, and we say that we sort of manage it through the HR system, but really it precedes the HR system, and it was just a way of managing in terms of having these conversations that are coaching conversations. So you sort of, it's giving you the opportunity to catch things before it gets to a disciplinary process. So it is a way of sort of, and I think as well, it means that you can have the right conversations with the right people in terms of previously, if you've got high missed collections and you're just trying to sort of say to the whole workforce, stop missing bins, it doesn't really sort of land, does it? And people will be thinking, well, I don't. But it's being able to provide those very specific examples to them. And then you are speaking to the people that, where you are seeing the higher missed collections or higher speeding offences. And then that means the other people sort of aren't getting those conversations all the time when they were doing quite well all along and so on. So
it's probably good as well that you can go back the week after and say, that thing we talked about last week, it's now better.
Yeah.
Rather than just, I've got a complaint and the next week there isn't a complaint, so you don't talk about it. It's actually, you can follow it through and show that, well, what you did made it better. Keep doing it and turn it into a positive, the week after. It's now all good.
Yeah. And we do that. And I think you can see the journey we've been through with the supervisors. So people have traditionally, when we were talking about this was like an alien concept, the idea that we would almost depersonalise it, move from the streams, look at the data. A lot of scepticism around that, obviously. But the view being actually, as they've started to experience it, and I always felt it was a bit like pushing a rock up a hill. Like you push it up and then you let go and it roll back down. They go back to paper and the old systems. I honestly feel like, and we're probably a year and a half into it now, it's over the hill and down the other side. So now I don't go into a lot of these meetings anymore. And you go into the meeting and they've created their own dashboards and they're cutting data in different ways and they're asking the data team to produce information for them. And you go, right, now you're there, because actually you're realising that this isn't a scary tool that's a problem. This is a way that you can make your life easier. So one of the things we did have, again, we'll pick it about, in summer, we had a problem where we had some absence over 1 week where we had a really high spike in absence. It's right at the back end of the summer holidays. And actually there was this view that everyone's doing all they can. We've worked really hard. It was genuinely this view that we've done everything we can. We've asked all we can of the crew. But when we went away and, I looked at it over the weekend at what had happened, you look at it and go, actually, there was quite a lot of undertime in there. So when that driver's saying, I can't do any more, as a supervisor, you felt that day like that was a genuine position. So you couldn't challenge it or engage or coach or talk to the person. But when you pull the data out, you go, well, actually, do you realise that you were under time on this day, this day, this day, and this day? So actually, yes, I do want you to do that. That is a very different conversation than I'm telling you to get the work done, which is what would have happened in the past. And we're finding it's a totally different conversation now. When you sit them down and go, actually, I do want you to go and pick up that work. And I shouldn't have to tell you this, but actually, do you realise you've had 3 hours worth of overtime, or undertime during this period? And actually, we've paid you this. The guys go, fair play. I'll go and do it.
That's part of the journey of the, the changing the task. That's not something that you can do overnight. You can't just say, oh, by the way, it's task and finish when everything is complete now, because that's, these things, exactly, that they're deeply ingrained, aren't they? And so we've had to sort of look at the way we approach that. And the reason why a lot of the crews were feeling like they'd they'd been pushed and they'd done lots, it's because they'd sort of completed their work pack for the day and then they were asked to do more. But what they weren't asked to do was sort of work over their paid hours. And so we've sort of had to have a look at how we approach that. Yeah. And a lot of the time it was the supervisors ringing up and saying, can you do me a favour? Yeah. Can you do all these extra bins, and can you do this, and can you go there? And it's being presented as you being asked to do a favour. So they were like, well, hang on, no, you've asked me for loads of favours this week. But really, we were only asking them to continue to work within their paid hours. Yeah. So when we look at, it's a favour if you're asking people to do overtime, which of course, obviously they would be paid for, but that's their choice then, whether they want to do that extra work. But when we looked, we were like, well, actually very few people had worked, not overtime, but even their complete paid hours that week. And that's a cultural piece that you need to do, and it's the habits of a lifetime in terms of how you approach that. And so that's what we're looking at in terms of, yes, you've got your work pack that you're going out to do that day, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is the end of the working day. And then that sort of helps as well with this, rushing round in order to get that finished, because you're going to be going home at the end of that. And that's where you sort of have, increased miscollections or, breaches of health and safety, more near misses, that sort of thing. Because it doesn't necessarily mean that once you've completed that work pack that's it, that's the end of the day. There's probably going to be more coming. In fact, the sooner you finish that, the more likely it is that there will be something else that's passed on to you. So it's in your interest to sort of go through and do that well. And that is very much work in progress. That's not something that's going to change overnight, but it is sort of slowly getting there on that. So.
And the approach has allowed us, we have taken rounds out. We did the big reroute exercise. And I've been through lots of reroutes on both sides of the fence, and you tend to find you put them out and straight away, these can't complete, I can't do these rounds, I can never do all this sort of stuff, because it's quite stark. Normally we're taking X rounds out. For the collection crews, that's a big change. What we found is actually, and I've been on the side when we've seen lots of them fail and all the rounds get added back in, you end up where you started. I think what this approach we take is just incremental. So actually we will slowly, like for example, property growth, we're dropping property growth onto the rounds. Now actually we're not putting new rounds on. And while we're doing it, we're also taking off rounds slowly by shrinking and by shrinking and by shrinking. And eventually you move the round out of the way. Now to the people who are doing the work, it doesn't feel the same. So we've taken out huge numbers, about £100,000 a year ongoing of savings from planned delivery review efficiencies that we've taken out from removing rounds by slow incremental change. And the idea that, yes, the big reroutes you can get people in to help, but actually if you can train yourselves and make sure you're constantly reviewing your rounds, you can make incremental changes and also add in property growth. So for us, for example, and I think a lot of people will be the same, you'll tend to find that the council will pay you an increase for that. So for us, we can say we don't need that. We'll just absorb property growth, which is a significant saving to a lot of them. And you can do that via incremental, putting 10 properties on here and there and removing 10 properties here and there. So you do that every week, over 52 weeks, and you start removing, and eventually you can drop off rounds.
Yeah, and that's been the part that has been a journey for the operational staff. And this whole piece of, that's your round and it's the same every week. That's where the technology is essential, that they need to be looking at their in-cab devices. They need to be checking that every day, because you can't assume that what you did last week is what you're doing this week. And I think that the seasonal garden waste helps with that a bit, because we take subscriptions all the way through, so that sort of got into the mindset that might change every week. And then that we've sort of managed to do that across the workforce as well, that it might change during the day. It certainly might have changed from last week, because we will be moving things around, and that again is not something that you can do overnight, but sort of through this journey. And it's not been a huge period of time, has it? No. We are only sort of looking at the last sort of 12-18 months of this, but that has become slowly more accepted.
So we talked a bit about the sort of the workload side, the demand side of it. The agency, obviously, supply side, where you've just got this, traditionally you've got this almost unlimited tap of, I need 5 of these and 2 of those, and get them in, really, really quickly. You haven't got that now. So what have you built to give yourself that flexibility internally to be able to cope with sickness and holidays and seasonality? Have you put that in?
So we plan the numbers that we plan for the rounds are, and it's quite interesting. They're not actually randomly. We're not flat. The numbers aren't flat. So we run fortnightly collections. So twin bin system. It actually varies at the moment between weeks. That's because we're still rolling out a narrow service for the council on that one. So we do have a disparity between days and between weeks, which we do want to eradicate once we've rolled out the narrows. But for now, it adds an extra complication that you've obviously got to staff for the highest number with the sickness. So we put in a predicted number for sickness, for holidays in there, which gets, so you need this many staff to be able to do that. But obviously you've got to manage quite carefully the sickness and manage quite carefully the holidays around that to make sure that you're targeting that number. We have what we tend to find with the agency before, they would have someone who was out there recruiting and training, doing stuff. Well, we just employed someone to do that ourselves because actually you were just paying an agency to do that. You may as well do that yourself. So we've got that person who's responsible for obviously sourcing people and bringing them in. I would say arguably as well, you're going out and employing a different person because I'm advertising permanent jobs with us, whereas actually you're going to an agency who are advertising temporary jobs or movable jobs. We were looking at a different pool. So traditionally Kia would use the agency to recruit. So you'd recruit them in, they'd be good for so many weeks, then you'd make them permanent employees. That works and that's fine, you can do that approach. But in reality, you're not giving them the stability during that period and you're only going to people who came looking for an agency. I know a lot of people who wouldn't go to an agency first, they'll be looking at permanent employment. So we tried to do that in terms of being able to do that. So we have that dedicated resource who does that. But then a lot of it is down to that careful management. The problem you get to then is that's your flat. That does you for most of the year. Obviously, there's Christmas and you've got. But then the problem is the seasonal stuff, isn't it? Really.
So I think, and in terms of sort of the holidays and the disparity between the weeks, what they'd always previously done was they'd planned sort of from an operational perspective, well, I'm allowed 8 people off on holiday a day. So they would have that many slots in the holiday book, but lots of people might go off sick. And at the beginning of the week, you would know, well, these people are off sick and they're probably not going to be back in, but then they wouldn't change. But I'm still allowed 8 people off every day. So a lot of these things were static. So that's the bit where we've put the flexibility in. So obviously on the heavier week, there's fewer holidays available. And then we try to push more holidays out on the lighter week. And then you tie that in with the sort of trends that you know you will have throughout the year, and sort of adjust the holiday allowances accordingly on that. And the other side of that is that we do that from a sort of a whole borough approach now as well, whereas previously it was very much we run 2 separate depots, and that, you know, they would sort of manage that at a depot level, whereas now we sort of take a more sort of whole operation approach on there as well. And it's about sort of monitoring those trends, and, you know, dialing that up and down as you go, depending on what it is you're dealing with at that time. So
we've picked up the seasonal working, we've picked up with sort of like fixed term contracts. So the idea of actually offering that as an option rather than having something which will be done through the agency, because essentially there are people who does suit. So in reality, we made that available to our own staff, because some staff did transfer on because they're like, actually, I quite like that. I want to take more time around winter. I'll do something different. You find some of the staff will go and deliver packages for Amazon and stuff, because actually in the winter period, they can make quite a lot of money doing that, but they'll come back to us to do the garden waste work. So we found that has been one way to do it. We've got quite a lot of interest because it suits certain people. I think one of the things we do find has been a bit of a challenge is obviously when you're recruiting people yourself, you'll tend to find that the turnover rate of people who then just don't like the job has been a problem. Yeah. It is one of those jobs where you put them out and they either like it or they don't like it. And I think that was a big issue for us. And it's still an issue we're battling through.
It is. I think one of the things that we've sort of discovered on this journey is that we sort of uncovered problems in terms of managing this that we thought were new problems, but actually they've always been there. They were just sort of masked by an agency because there's always more people. So one of the main issues has been managing the churn, which, you know, is obviously an issue when you've got temporary staff anyway, but it's more of an issue when you're taking on permanent staff. So obviously bringing them in and then spending a lot of time on the induction process and training and so on. If you then lose those people a couple of weeks in, that's what we were finding was putting a pressure on the operation. The supervisory team was spending a lot of time training and inducting, and then we were just losing them. So, and obviously we'd always done the inductions, but an element of that had been done by the agency as well. So I think rather than just getting more people in, what we've had to do is go, right, why are we losing these people? You know, either if you get them to stay a month, they stay, but it's that sort of like crucial time. So that's when we've sort of really examined that. And one thing that we hadn't done well previously was exit interviews. In terms of when it was agency staff, they were like, oh, well, they're gone. Yeah. So whereas now we sort of built that in to sort of like, well, what was the problem? You know, how can we sort of fix that? And some of them, it's like, I just don't like it. It's a lot harder work than they were expecting it to be. It's very physical. You know, they were very tired and so on. But then it did uncover some other things. So sort of, you know, they were a case of not necessarily always feeling welcome, or they weren't given time to ease in. So, you know, sort of they were thrown in at the deep end. Some of the crews would, you know, sort of give them the rough end of the stick, sitting by the door. So they're the ones that are getting in and out more than anybody else, that sort of thing. So we sort of looked at that of sort of how we can ease people into it. So then we changed some of our practices there. We'd sort of identified crews that could act as nursery crews that were there to sort of bring people in, ease them in. And, you know, they were sort of compensated for that as well. So we changed our induction process. So sort of the week one, when it came to loaders, they would be an additional loader on a crew. So it would ease the pressure overall. Week two, they would be with a nursery crew that would sort of give them the extra time they needed to settle in and the training that they needed. And then week three, that they would go on to a round. And that way we found that we were able to retain the staff a lot better. And then that provided other opportunities as well within our current workforce to sort of develop. So obviously a lot of this induction time was, you know, took up the supervisor's time. So then because of that, we were then able to offer like a relief supervisor position. So people within the operation that wanted to step up into sort of having a go at the supervising. So we've sort of plugged those gaps. So it's you know, created some more development pathways for us as well. So it has overall been a benefit, and we've managed to retain these staff, but we just wouldn't have put that much effort into it previously, because we just would have had
disposable staff,
more people, really. So,
and I think it is interesting, because I talked about it a few times. It's a bit like going out there, and I went out with the crews the other week for the day. I mean, I think myself quite fit and healthy and stuff, but it's even down to the little bits in terms of like just your feet and stuff afterwards. They always watch Deadliest Catch, where they go out and they're getting them through the first week without them wanting to go back in again, because it's very, very hard. Once they're through that, they're the same people you see on every show, because ultimately once they get through that, and it's that approach of going, actually, you know what, during them first few weeks, you're going to go home, your legs are going to sort of, getting them the help and doing the advice that they need, really. 2 pairs of socks on, do this, do that. Well, that wasn't happening. They were getting jumped onto a crew, and then the crew were almost doing the opposite. And actually, you want them to go with the right crew to make sure that their training process is linked to that crew. So actually, are they handling bins properly? Like, I know that I was spinning bins too much with my right arm, and the next day I could feel it here. Now, that was because I wasn't doing what the process was properly. But if you're with a proper trained crew, they should be, in the early days, stopping that bad behaviour. Because once they've done it and they've got on the crew, and if they haven't been taught, they'll do that over and over till they injure themselves. So it's about making sure there's that staged approach, because actually you start realising the staff you see the investment you've made as a business to get them on the vehicle. And it's them understanding you are going to waste all that if you just scare them back off. The other thing we've looked at is the idea around... and we haven't actually had this problem because of the way people move on. I think the industry, people move on to other jobs, and you find actually there is a decent turnaround of people, not just from doing different things really. It's very much there's loads of jobs out there for people to go and do, and what you'll find is what we offered was the ability that if you are on a fixed term contract, we will guarantee that we will restart your service from when you come back again and have continuation, because obviously that would matter from sickness and holidays and stuff like that. And also we make sure that we also, as part of that process, the money that it would have cost us to train someone new, we give it to them. Right. So if they come back, the money we would save by not putting new PPE on people and doing all that, we've put that in a little package for them and go, right, if you come back next spring, then actually you get this, this and this. As it's happened most years, we end up making them permanent staff anyway, because a lot of the staff go, okay, I like this, I want to stay. But it's something we're going to carry on with. I think one of the things we did identify is that while that covers that period, there is a period within that period which is particularly problematic, which is this 6 to 8 weeks summer holiday period was problematic for us this year. So, and this was saying some of this stuff, it was a problem that was there before, it was just hidden by the agency really, and they would just get more and more people at that stage. But the view we've found is that during that 6 week period, particularly because in terms of getting people to stay and almost like not, I book in a holiday request, I don't get it, I phone in sick. That wouldn't have happened as much. I think now the way that, in terms of the way they'll get topped up sometimes for the wage being decreased and stuff like that, means that actually sometimes that happens. You almost have to accept that you don't really have all the power of those 6 to 8 weeks. So people are going to take the leave. If you don't make enough leave available, people are going to just not come to work. So what we're looking at doing now is we actually had quite a few students this year who came, because what we had is we kept the fixed term offer open. And then really we got to the bit when students went on holiday, and we got a chunk of students, which we weren't expecting really, that only wanted to do 6 to 8 weeks and then go back to uni again, but they didn't want to work in a supermarket or somewhere. They wanted to go and do stuff outside. So we're going to put that as a separate offer and work with the universities and just generally advertise it to people that are coming home to go, actually, 6 week contract. So almost boost our numbers for 6 to 8 weeks, which gives capacity to give people the leave that they need in summer, which will allow them to handle that. Because actually, it was a real problem.
It was and these are some of the things, in the first year, you don't anticipate all of the challenges that you're going to have, do you? And so at the beginning of this, we recruit on fixed term contracts to cover the chargeable garden waste period. Now, when you're recruiting those people in February, March, ready for that season, a fixed term contract through to November is quite an attractive prospect. Yeah, it's a good chunk of time. But then if you're losing staff and then recruiting partway through, by the time you're sort of getting to like June, July, and you're only offering a fixed term contract in November, it's a less attractive prospect, isn't it? So that's where we were finding it more difficult to boost the numbers there. And, as it turns out, because of natural churn, a lot of the people that we've offered fixed term contracts, we are sort of keeping on as permanent anyway, because by the time you get to that end point, you've lost some of them. And, there's some really great staff there that we know that we want to keep hold of. And there's lots of other things that take place in that gap of when garden waste is turned off. We do a lot of our training, we do a lot of project work and that sort of stuff. So you do still need those extra numbers. But yes, that was when it was really challenging, was in the summer period. And that's one of the lessons we learned in sort of the data in terms of, as we said, we've planned for the number of holidays, we've planned for sort of the expected levels of sickness. But one thing that we'd never sort of planned in, because there's no budget for it, is these unpaid absences. So things like, obviously, childcare, especially during that summer period, that bereavement. We've got quite generous terms in terms of like how much time you can take off for bereavement. And when you've got a workforce of 300 people, you can kind of expect there's always going to be some people and that's the kind of thing, because we're not paying for that. It wasn't budgeted in the same way that the holiday and absence figures were. So what we've had to do is sort of, we've got your financial budget in terms of what your staff are going to cost, but you also need your operational budget in terms of how many man you're going to have, whether you're paying for them or not, how many staff are actually going to be in, and you have to account for these sort of unpaid absences. So that's something that we've had to build in to our planning, which wasn't there previously. And yes, that was the peak time. So I think we quite happily stumbled across the fact that we did have all these students that were sort of joined on this fixed term, but they had really no intention of staying. And that's another thing that the exit interviews have helped inform. So we're like, well, great. We've got quite a lot of local colleges and so on sort of in the area. So next year we're really going to focus on sort of getting them in there.
So that thing about the bereavement leave and that's actually one of the core things you wanted to provide, wasn't it? It was that social value that you wouldn't have got working for an agency. You're able to give that to your workforce. So it's
I think it's a development piece as well. We do a lot of work, so the one of our own programme, we do a lot of work around promote that social ethos, but promoting our staff through it and supporting them a little bit. And actually, interestingly, the students, quite a lot of time you come across people who actually could go in other parts of the business. So for example, at the moment we've got like what our planner came as a loader and actually but had an aptitude for doing that. So we are constantly looking at pathways. You'll tend to find a lot of the staff, a chunk of them, they've been there for years, that's all they want to do, they're quite happy. We do a lot of driver to loader programs, we offer that, but there are other people there that go, actually, no, you could do this, or do you want to do that? And they've come in a slightly different way. I think one of the things that is interesting that we do need to take it a step further on is this issue of how we manage leave. And actually, we're going to got a working group set up to with the supervisors, some people off the front line to go, right, okay, that was hard at times, but the benefit was we didn't use agency. Now, what's interesting is if I'm a supervisor, I'm thinking, I was happy with agency. It made my life easier. What we need to help them understand is they aren't here. They're not a private company anymore. We're a council-owned company that's there to do good for the community as well. We want stable, invested jobs. I mean, people feel like they're moving forward. So actually, that's why we don't want agency. Yes, it is tricky, but we want to get the working group, go, right, okay, everyone, that was hard, but what can we do differently? So one of the things we're looking about with leave, for example, is could we have a situation where we move to like a red, amber, green approach and go, actually, we have sort of red, the peak weeks are red and you have to book them in advance and they count as normal and you have to do them X number of time in advance and maybe have a view that you can only pick so many red weeks, just to bet fairness. Otherwise, someone will book it 3 years in advance and that's not fair. But then you create amber weeks, which actually we know we've got a bit more capacity on, which is probably slightly outside the school holidays. But I mean, a lot of our workforce don't need to go in the summer holidays. And then also have green weeks where we incentivise it. So a day actually counts as half a day. So you can take a full day for half a day. And we can look at trying to do it that way, that actually, or offering some way of incentivising some of that to help us naturally flatten the spikes, because actually people will go, you know what, actually I'll just take a load of green weeks off because I don't need, but actually we're at a situation now where I want a red week because everyone else gets a red week. So if we can do it that way, which gives us a natural flattening and then adjust that a little bit, that's sort of the next stage. But we want to try and talk to the workforce, say, look, we haven't got all the ideas here, but it's getting that message out. Why is it important not to have agency? Because if you're a loader or a supervisor, they're not that bothered really, but it's about saying it's because that means I can put a person next to you in a cab who stays, and then next year he'll come back again and they'll be trained. So you won't have because they always complain about getting new people and they're not as good, but we've had to do a lot more communication to the workforce to help them understand, because all they saw it was as pain getting rid of the agency. Because really, obviously, we're interested in the social value and we do our social value score and we generate X million pounds worth of social value, which is great. But if you're a driver or a loader or a supervisor, why are you bothered? So we need to try and boil that down so they can understand.
And just, make it aware that we have listened and we saw where it was difficult this year and we want to make sure that people aren't put in that position again. Because, and if people need it off, they take it off. One of the things that we'd noticed that we would put up in the reception, like what holidays were available and so on, so they know that when they could book it and try and manage it that way. But then if you're in a situation where there are no holidays available, people are coming in and going, well, I know I'm not going to get a holiday, so I'm just going to ring in sick. And you're giving them the heads up then on when, so we just need to make sure that that we are making this time available. And if we need to do it, supplementing with extra, student and shorter contracts and so on, then we'll do that to make sure that we're making, a workable environment where they can get access to the time off that they need. So,
do you think it's changed the demographic of your workforce in terms of, the age profile or the gender profile or, the number of working hours people do?
It's an interesting question, actually, and I don't actually know, but it's something that we can have a look at,
I think what's interesting with that, because it's something we've been looking at quite a lot in terms of how we move to a situation where, because it's getting harder now, you're running, the recruitment pool is getting
It's hard to recruit,
and
so you've
harder
got to be flexible
on
on this. Because the
And
workforce wants to be flexible. That's what we see in our business. People want to work different hours. They want to. They don't necessarily want to work full time. You know, you certainly get to people who, you know, perhaps at my lofty age, who start to think, I might not want to work full time.
Yeah.
You know, or I might not want to. I might not want to work when it's peeing with rain. You know. You know. So actually, being able to adopt that is going to help you to recruit people, isn't it?
It is, and I think what we've identified is actually, for example, the task and finish, that traditional mentality of task and finish means that you can't bring in flexible practices, because if you can imagine, we're on a 40-hour week, we aim to land it within a target finish time, so actually, but we accept half an hour, 45 minutes under is an acceptable landing space, so our rounds are planned on the view that if they come in 40 minutes, 34 minutes early, some days, ups and downs, we're happy with that. But that only works to a proviso whereby everyone is on 40 hours, that they work standard hours, and then actually there's a balance there. Now, we're having conversations about, well, actually, if we wanted to open up a sector of employment around who have got caring responsibilities, because potentially it could really work. So you could come in the morning, you could have an arrangement whereby, whether either with children or with family members you need to care for, and you go, okay, I'll do the morning, I'll start here, and all our twin packs come in and unload about lunchtime-ish. You could have it whereby you went, okay, we'll send the round out with 2 loads in the morning, and then they'll get in, they'll unload at 1 o'clock, and one of the loaders can go home, and we'll reduce their hours to 32 hours, whatever it is, contract, and then actually send the round back out to do a little bit of work at the end with 1 loader. Jobs are good on that one, but you can't do that if actually they've gone home and they're being paid for that many hours, but then the crew actually really only went out for another hour, but they're being paid for that many hours. So that ability to offer that flexibility on that scenario, or whether we go to if you've said I want to do a 4-day week or reduced hours, it's really difficult because from an equal pay point of view, it's a real problem. So I think it's going to be an industry issue, this, as we move forward and the workforce wants more flexibility and more modern approach. The idea of the old school, you get in, you get done, you get home, that's fine while you can find enough people to do that job. But that isn't really how the world sort of works anymore. It's coming less that way. So actually, the idea of like I said, our staff are salaried, it is task and finish within a boundary. In reality, you're going to probably have to, and you've seen other councils who've got in problems for this around equal pay claims and stuff, you're going to have to get to a situation where they're the hours you're doing. There aren't many other services anywhere doing anything where you'd expect to go home. It just doesn't happen. It wouldn't happen anywhere else. But in waste, it does. And until we tackle that one way or the other and get to a fair approach, you completely block all the pathways for flexibility, which I think is what stops some of the addressing the gender balance in the workforce and stuff like that. Because fundamentally, a lot, not just childcare, there's a lot of caring responsibilities that are disproportionately at that point. We're not providing a work environment which
it just makes it an employment opportunity that is not going to be available to you because you cannot make it work.
And it's a very physical job that perhaps you can't do 40 hours a week. But maybe you can do 20 hours a week.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And we will have rounds. We could plan for this. We could plan that actually, you know what, on that day, that round is going to get through that much in the morning. We'll give them a slight allowed to property count in the afternoon. And actually what we'll do is we'll put 1 loader on it and we'll let someone have a half day on Thursday, and you make that opportunity available, and we make certain numbers of those opportunities available. You can't do that until people are all working. The hours
and you've got the data and the measurement tools to be able to measure what is a fair amount of work and being able to design a route that's got a lower run rate in the afternoon because there's only 1 loader. If you haven't got the data and technology, you can't do it.
And we've got some more flexibility in terms of operational staff working reduced hours, but that has to be done on sort of there is a day off a week, which is great, but it sort of doesn't work around sort of managing your life around any care and responsibilities and that sort of thing. That needs to be number of hours worked each day. So you really need to nail that down to be able to make sure that we can make those opportunities viable for people.
So for the millions of people listening to this interview, or both of them, however many it is, so for people listening to this, how would they get started? From where a traditional council might be on task and finish, or the traditional ways of working to where you are. What's the first thing to do?
It's it's get your data right, know what's happening, and you know, and study that. You can't jump into this without sort of knowing what the challenges are going to be. No, don't do that. Definitely not. I would say step it down.
Don't burn the bridges.
And yeah, it's just sort of so important to know what your holiday and absence trends are and your start and finish times, crucially. And yeah, it's sort of get that baseline information, and then you can see where your challenges are going to be. You can't plan for everything, sure, and definitely sort of, you know, learn from our experiences in sort of this year that, you know, you really need to plug those gaps in terms of where your absence challenges are going to be. But yeah,
I think it's part of a journey, really. And we've had, obviously, we came to RWM, we had conversations with lots of councils about this. We've talked quite a lot about our data-driven approach and why we think we're very different to lots of other people, even private companies, really. And actually, really, the starting point is get the data right. And if you can get all the data in one place, and in a place that you can actually use it for something. I hear a lot of people going, oh, I've got all the telematics, I've got this, I've got both. Marvellous. But is it in any sort of a way that you can make any actions out of it? Is it digestible? So actually, we've done a lot of work on making sure the data is all in one place. You can link it to data from other systems. We don't try and get a super system. We merge the data, not the systems. And it sounds like we've got huge swathes of people, and we haven't. We've got our data analyst was actually someone who came to us by one of the supervisors' sons, who was looking to work with us, and we've invested in them. We've sent them on training courses, and now they're very experienced in Power BI and SQL and stuff. It wasn't like we've spent huge sums of money on big IT companies.
We have one data person and two planning people that are multifunctional as well. They're not just planning. So yeah, you don't need a lot of resource. You just need the right resource, I think.
But if you start from the principle of understanding that, then you can understand what's happening with your rounds, your start and finish times. So then you can plan the staff you need better. So then you get to the point that go, right, now I know all that. Now I can tackle the agency. Because the problem you'd have is until you know all that, people genuinely will think it's an impossible feat because, but what about this? And but this person suddenly goes off sick, and what if my sickness rate goes? And it is a genuine problem, but unless you've got that data, I have a view that very little things should just jump out at you. I think lots of people would say, but this happens, but what about this? Those things are generally quite predictable as long as you've got the data, because things happen in patterns and trends generally. But if you haven't got any data, then you'll never have the patterns and trends. So I would say agency reduction. You can do it a little bit, because I would argue that actually if you're using an agency to recruit on your behalf, just employ a person, because it's the same thing. But if this is about actually then getting rid of that completely, that's a different kettle of fish. You need to start from a base and go, actually, I'm going to build this up. So we've had lots of conversations about Bartek can provide that through Collective. They can provide a data set that you need to start to understand start-finish times and data a little bit more. Yes, we plug in lots of other things and messing around with all sorts of stuff, and particularly as we move with AI forward, there's loads of capabilities that we can do with that. But before you start going up there, just start at the bottom and go, actually, let's get the data. You need to know who's on every round, what the start and finish times are, how many properties they've got, what's just the basics. Start with the basics, build some simple dashboard approaches and review it that way. And then once you begin the journey, it's like you'll get to the point where as long you need someone who's going to keep pushing the rock up.
Yeah.
But you will get to the stage where it will start rolling, and then you go down the other side of the hill.